clearly President Trump has been outplayed by President Putin. I mean, Putin is at his, I think it's seventh or sixth U.S. president. And I think President Trump entered the negotiation thinking he can do a transactional deal with Putin. But Putin is not a transactional person. Putin is a leverage strength person.
You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
Even today.
As part of the deal, or is
No.
that on the table?
No.
Mr. President,
We don't need that.
Mr. President, I just wanted to ask.
We are staying in our country, staying strong. From the very beginning of the war, we've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks.
You haven't been alone.
Cabinet,
you haven't been alone. We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion. We gave you military equipment, and you men are brave, but they had to use our military.
What about
if you didn't have our military equipment, if you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
maybe less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yeah.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
Again, just say thank you.
I said a lot of times thank you to American people.
Except that they're.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards. You're buried there. You're people are dying. You're running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I wanted this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you'd take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
with guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire.
That meeting in the Oval Office in February, who could possibly forget it? Now let's start looking ahead at what is coming in these coming minutes and hours, starting with George Grills, who is the Times Washington correspondent and is on the line. Welcome to you, George.
Good morning from Washington.
It's great to have you here, George. I mean, is there, or what can you give us, George, by way of informed speculation, indications of what President Trump wants to achieve in these meetings later?
Well, he's clearly feeling a bit aggrieved by the reception he's had to his summit with President Putin in Alaska. He's been kind of non-stop on Truth Social over the past kind of 12 hours or so, basically saying, I've done a brilliant deal. No one would celebrate me if I did a deal, that got Moscow and St. Petersburg back for Ukraine. And he's also announced that he wants to scrap mail-in voting. Now, that is important because if you go back to the 2020 election, Trump's main allegation of why it was stolen was that he said that these kind of absentee ballots were false and all the rest of it. But crucially, during his meeting with Putin, behind closed doors, Putin played on those fears. He kind of exaggerated that kind of conspiratorial mindset that Trump has and said to him, you're right, you should pay attention to these mail-in ballots. And now, Trump is putting a post out on Truth Social this morning saying, he's going to do exactly what he discussed with Putin behind closed doors.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is absolutely fair to say, even transparently true, that Vladimir Putin understands that one way to deal with Donald Trump, maybe the only way, is to tell him things that he absolutely wants to hear and to add on layers of praise. And Putin, from what we've seen since Alaska, gave him plenty of both of those things. Told him he transformed America, that the election that he lost was stolen from him, and that obviously went down well, clearly, with Donald Trump now. And as for the meetings later on, against all of that background, the red carpet for Putin, the change of tone in Putin's favour, what do you see there? There has been this curious talk from Steve Witkoff, his envoy, talking about the possibility of a security guarantee being given to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire, and America playing a part in that. Is there any idea, George, on what that might come to mean?
Well, what he's been saying is that it will be an Article 5 style agreement. So under NATO, an attack on one country is considered an attack on all. But he was saying it would be Article 5 minus the NATO membership.
Yes.
The problem with that, crucially, is that Trump himself has kind of suggested that Article 5 the original version, the NATO version, is basically in doubt these days. He's not sure if he would come to defend an Eastern European country that was attacked by Russia if they weren't paying. So the fact he's raised doubts about the original Article 5 makes Ukraine probably a bit suspicious of his commitment to an Article 5 minus NATO. And it comes down to the fact that in a matter of life or death for the Ukrainians, if the Russians were going to invade again, would Trump stick by his word and enforce a ceasefire? And that's a pretty galling choice they've got to confront.
It's a fascinating situation, really well summed up for us by you, George. Thank you. I mean, it makes the presence of that lineup of presidents and prime ministers from Europe more explicable. I mean, clearly no one wants to be seen to be left out. That's part of the politics, I guess, too. But maybe it's also a demonstration of a lack of faith in what Donald Trump might be offering at this meeting. The president, of course, sees it as a tribute to his enormous role and his enormous influence. George, thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn now to Karin von Hippel, who's a former Director General of the United Services Institute. Karin, welcome.
Thank you, John. Hi, nice to see you.
It's lovely to have you here, Karin. Can I just get your judgment on this question of a security guarantee? Karin, what kind of security guarantee must the United States give to make a coalition of the willing guarding a ceasefire line a credible deterrent?
Great question. I wish I knew. I mean, I think, according to Steve Witkoff, that Putin has also accepted that the United States provide this security guarantee. But what does it mean in practice? What does the United States do? What does Europe do? Are there troops inside? Are they in the region? We know already that the Europeans can't provide enough troops to have a credible deterrent. And so the United States would really have to back it up, but they haven't spelled it out. And it's not entirely clear to me, as your correspondent was just saying, what America is willing to do in the event that Russia violates a ceasefire, which we know it will.
No, indeed. I mean, an Article 5 pledge means that any kind of attack on any NATO territory means America would be at war with Russia. It's difficult to see Trump wanting to give anything like a guarantee of that kind. And there are other questions too, aren't there, Karin? I mean, what if it comes to a ceasefire and you have forces guarding the line of former contact, the line of control? Well, you could easily imagine, because it fits the Russian playbook, to have proxy forces engaged on the Russian side, which really would give a dilemma to those coalition members.
I mean, Russia can do all sorts of tricks. And don't forget, Trump has not once applied any real pressure on Russia. It only recently, in the last few weeks, was when Trump said, well, we will put pressure, we will put sanctions on Putin. He only recently threatened Putin, but then he's already backed off of that since the meeting in Alaska. And so it really isn't clear to me what it would mean in practice. If the Ukrainians did give up some of the territory that the Russians are demanding, that's their current line of defense. And so it would put them in a weaker position militarily and push them back. And it would enable the Russians to, have a greater foothold on which, so that they can attack Ukraine in the future when they rearm, which everybody thinks they're going to do. So I don't think anybody sees this as the end. Now, look, the Ukrainians can be smart, and Zelensky can be smart in this meeting. He can say, we totally consider this a really interesting proposal. Thank you for your effort. Our Constitution says that I need to put it to a referendum. And so I can't, even though I think it's an interesting proposal, I need to put it to a referendum. And he can buy time that way. And I don't know if he's going to do that. I don't know what the plan is, but I'm very glad that he's got some really good reinforcements with him on this visit. It's not clear to me that they will be in the room, though, when this meeting is happening. Do you know if that's the case?
No, I don't know if that's the case. I do know they're due to be in the White House, physically present. Yeah. And there's a meeting in the East Wing of the White House later on after the Zelensky-Trump bilateral takes place. I mean, I don't know. We shall see together. I imagine it would be surprising if in that Oval Office meeting, with the press pretty limited on who's going to be allowed to be there, to see that lineup of presidents and prime ministers in the background, shaking their heads or nodding, as the case may be. It's not maybe the kind of optics the White House would want, but we'll see how that plays out. At the moment, all we can do, I suppose, on some of these questions, Karin, is speculate. Does this look to you like a bilateral and a set of talks on the possibility of ending the fighting, which is destined to fail?
I am worried, like a lot of people are worried, and partially because I just don't see Trump willing to push the Russians to make any real concessions. He's only so far really been pushing Zelensky. He just wants to say, we're done, one and done, and let's walk away. Trump is never interested in details, and he doesn't always empower his people to dig into the details and to come up with a credible plan. But there's only, we just don't know what's going to happen. I think we'll know, I hope we know more in a few hours, but I suspect this is going to drag out for weeks because, of course, Zelensky can say and will likely say it needs to go to a referendum. It may take me some time. How do Ukrainians that are overseas vote? I mean, it's all very complicated how this happens. So I don't know what happens in the event that Zelensky says, I'm sorry, I just can't do that. And I'm not sure how much the Europeans can do without the Americans. So I am worried. I think, look, Zelensky showed some willingness by saying, let's talk about the line of control now, not the territory that Russia doesn't have, but it's claiming that it wants. So that already is showing you that Zelensky is willing to concede that they may not get the territory that Russians already have back, including in those 4 regions in the east as well as Crimea.
Meanwhile, in Washington, President Zelensky has been meeting with the U.S. envoy, Keith Kellogg. He's on X. Zelensky thanked General Kellogg. He reiterated that Russia attacked Ukraine last night. 2 children died as a result. Keir Starmer, he's there along with the French, German, Finnish, Italian and the EU and NATO leadership. All the preparation is taking place. We can have a look ahead now to the way this is playing out in Washington. And I can welcome Fabrice Pothier, who's the former head of NATO policy planning. Hello to you, Fabrice.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm well. Good to have you here, Fabrice. Thank you for joining us on the programme. So look, your NATO boss, Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, he's there with the team of Western European leaders. What do you think Mark Rutte, the NATO leader, wants to achieve today?
Well, I think he wants to achieve the same thing as his European counterparts. They want to convey to Trump that peace is possible, and he could get his big prize if he were to be willing to expand these famous U.S. security guarantees. And that short of that, it's quasi impossible for President Zelensky to make the hard compromises, the hard territorial compromises, without some form of guarantee. Okay. So I think they will come and sing that song from one sheet and hope that Trump is going to listen.
Let's then talk then about that crucial matter of a security guarantee for coalition forces supporting Ukraine, guarding a ceasefire, an end to the fighting, whatever it's called, when and if that happens. Now, realising that NATO doesn't have a formal role in this, it is about individual nation states operating independently and cooperating together. But what would a coalition of the willing to guard a ceasefire, in your judgment, from NATO, what would that need to look like? What would need to be in it?
Well, first, I think you need to step back a bit on what does security guarantee mean for Ukraine. And my firm, Rasmussen Global, had the privilege to work with President Zelensky and his team on this and develop what is now known as the Ukraine Compact, which is a series of 30 bilateral security agreements, including the United Kingdom and basically almost all NATO countries. The bottom line here is you've got 3 layers you need to get right. One is Ukraine's self-defense capabilities. Ukraine needs to be able to defend itself, its territory, on its own means, which we can provide, but Ukraine's forces and capabilities need to be there. So I think that's where NATO plays a role, because NATO now is the main conduit to some of the military aid going to Ukraine. Second, the European contributions, including the United Kingdom, what you mentioned, this famous or so-called coalition. Here, I think it's about, what kind of deployment, what kind of forces, how agile, how robust, how deployable and movable will they be if they're in Western Ukraine, and should they have to reinforce the Ukrainian colleagues on the front line. And then finally, the famous U.S. guarantees. What kind of guarantees are we talking about when it comes to the U.S.? Are we talking about enablers like intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, like air defense systems? Are we talking about a backstop, like your prime minister has been talking about from the start, which is essentially the U.S. saying, we have your back, you Europeans, in case there is a contingency? So I think it's about defining those 3 layers very clearly, have a very credible plan over the next few years, so that ultimately you have a credible deterrent forces setup that will keep Putin in a box, or at least keep Putin from doing another aggression like in 2022.
Okay, well, you say forming a credible deterrent, a combined force to guard a ceasefire over the coming years, but maybe we don't have anything like years. If there is to be a ceasefire, well, in any time, fairly soon, there'll need to be a credible force to guard the ceasefire. America, we don't know what sort of contribution they'd made, and the other countries in Europe, they don't have the numbers to provide a credible deterrent, do they? And that is it almost looks like an insurmountable obstacle.
I think we have I think we don't have the numbers until we have the numbers, John, in the sense that we have to be specific here. What kind of forces are we committing? Land forces, air force, maritime. So we have to be clear about the mix. And don't forget one thing. The Ukraine forces is now a pretty formidable European army. They have been holding the Russian forces in check for the past 3 years. It's not been always successful, but it's not either be dramatically a failure. And the Ukraine force is actually the most able to fight the Russians. So I think the first line of defense is to give the Ukrainians what they need to hold the line, to defend their cities from Russian missile and drone attacks. Then you can have the European forces to come and give extra punch, if you want, extra capabilities. But I don't think it's the Europeans about enforcing the ceasefire. I think the first force of enforcement will be Ukrainian forces. That's where providing them what they need, air defense, munitions, drones, and all sorts of heavy, armored vehicle systems will be crucial.
Okay, and getting that together would be quite a task. Last question about NATO's involvement. Mark Rutte, who's now the Secretary General, sometimes called the Trump whisperer. He spoke of Trump as daddy at that last recent summit. I guess maybe you can speak a bit more freely about what's on your mind. So, Fabrice, do you consider that President Trump is now on the side of Vladimir Putin, that he's a mouthpiece for Putin's position?
Yeah, it's an annoyingly right question to ask. I think the bottom line is clearly President Trump has been outplayed by President Putin. I mean, Putin is at his, I think it's 7th or 6th U.S. president. And I think President Trump entered the negotiation thinking he can do a transactional deal with Putin. But Putin is not a transactional person. Putin is a leverage strength person. And because Trump has been hesitant in exerting strengths on Russia before the negotiations, therefore, President Putin has entered those negotiations knowing that his adversary, his counterpart, the U.S. one, was too soft and therefore could impose his conditions. And that was the outcome of Alaska, where, basically Putin ended the way he started, and Trump was basically not left with a lot of room for maneuver. Now the risk is that he tries to make up for his failure in Alaska by leaning too hard on President Zelensky, which is obviously for President Trump a softer target. So this is where we are. But I don't think Trump is pro-Russia. I think Trump is keeping those two countries in equidistance, which obviously morally and strategically is wrong. And Trump has a bigger agenda, which is himself, which is the Nobel Peace Prize. And therefore, he just wants a quick deal. But Putin has all the time in the world to get the deal he wants to get. And I think that's the thing Trump has not been able to break, is to say, your time is counted, and I'm putting an extra cost on it.
Fabrice Pothier, former head of policy planning at NATO. Thank you, Fabrice, for joining me. Now we can get the views of Volodymyr Kandygin, the former Ukrainian ambassador to London and to NATO. Volodymyr, welcome.
Hello again.
Hello and welcome again to the programme. It was good to get your thoughts. So I want to ask you first, picking up on that last conversation, do you consider that Donald Trump, ahead of these meetings this evening, do you think he is now on Putin's side, that he's in any way a mouthpiece for the Russian leader?
Let me put it this way. I do think that he is on the Putin side, but maybe unconsciously. Maybe, and I think he does not understand to the fullest extent the nature of the conflict, the nature of the war, the reason of that, and that's why he is playing as an equal broker. He unconsciously is staying on the Russia side.
unconsciously, it was sort of delving into the psyche of President Trump. He dropped his demand for a ceasefire quite suddenly at that Alaska summit. He said, we're told afterwards, that was because progress had been made in those talks. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
That's the crux of the matter. We do not understand what progress was made to give up the concept of the ceasefire. And it only tells to me a chaotic approach of Trump to the issues of international security, to the security, or to security of the countries. So we do not understand quite clearly what progress he means, because in our view, that in my view at least, that the ceasefire is the necessary precondition of any meaningful negotiations. Without the ceasefire, I don't know what kind of paper, what kind of agreement will be put on the table. And because if the agreement that is stemming from the meeting in Alaska, we are very much skeptical that it could be acceptable to Ukraine.
So, Vladimir, this is a hypothetical question, clearly. We do not know what's going to be happening over these coming couple of hours and the days and weeks after that. If it turns out, because it's a big hypothetical, if it turns out that President Trump decides he has given up on this process, that he cannot get Zelensky to agree to the kind of terms Trump believes would be acceptable, and that he means to walk away, would that mean defeat for Ukraine? Would it mean defeat is unavoidable?
No, I don't think so. I think we over-exaggerate the level of the support that we are getting right now from Trump. And on the other hand, I firmly believe in the capabilities of United Europe to withstand the aggression from Russia. We only want Trump not to openly support Russia in terms of giving, lifting the embargo, for instance, something like that. He still has to be on the side of the good against evil. And I think together with Europe, we can manage. And I think Europe has waken up already and trying to invest more into defense and into the support of Ukraine. Even now, all the equipment that is coming to Ukraine are being bought by Europeans. Trump ceased the financing of the military aid to Ukraine already. So I think that if he gives up, which I don't think he will, but if he does, it's not the end in itself. We have to fight. We have to continue fighting Russian aggression.
All right. It's really good to hear from you as always. Hopefully we can talk again very soon. Vladimir Kanugi, former Ukrainian ambassador to London and an ambassador to NATO.